Welcome everybody, welcome. First day of NYU for how many folks? Raise your hand. Art and practice is something ultimately that is meant to be a guide and an aid to your main process of making in these other classes. So this is really primarily a thought space. This is a space for you to be able to be engaging in the kind of thinking that you need to be engaged with so that then you can make meaningful art in your craft classes, right? So if you get kind of the, kind of writer's block or anything that creatively you're not able to really work out, this is the place where we can engage in some of the thoughts, right? Where we could theoretically start to open up the floodgates and start to gain some clarity in terms of what it means to be an artist and what it means to develop and have an artistic practice. So it'll be a wide-ranging set of topics. It'll be an extensive kind of like set of ideas and reference points that I'll throw at all of you. You may not absorb all of them because, it'll be a lot and you may get excited about one thing and kind of stay on that. But the idea is to give you as many possible entry points to untapping a new sense of figuring out what the future of cinema is, because you are the future of cinema, right? Frank Ocean said that we're going to see the future first. So ideally, you guys can find a way to see the future first by thinking in a certain way and then ultimately making that happen when you're in your other classes. The first thing I want you guys to do is I want you to write about a time, right now, I want you for a few minutes, when you're about to write about a time that you felt stuck creatively. And I want for you to identify what stopped you from continuing when you felt stuck, right? So if you're trying to make something, right? Or you're trying to write something, you're trying to express something, there was something that got in the way. And let's try to identify what that is. Take a few minutes, we'll do it silently. One of the things that is tricky is that if you want to make great work, right? You guys are maybe aspiring to, make films that inspired you to even apply to this program, right? And you may be like, oh, I really want to make this kind of film, or, some of you may be Wes Anderson fans, or some may be Barry Jenkins fans, or some people might love Kubrick, whatever it might be, or Chloe Zhao, Kelly Reichardt. I think the idea is we have those as reference points that inspired us, but ultimately if we want to do the things that inspired us, we want to make something that's similar to that, we actually have to dig inside ourselves to find out our version of that, ultimately. So it's one of the reasons why I say that what you have lived is directly correlated to what you have to say, right? So a big thing for you to ask yourself is, what have I lived, right? What have you lived? What are some singular moments, some singular elements of your life experience, whether it be ones that maybe you haven't addressed before, ones that you haven't engaged with before? A lot of times it's those that actually might reveal some things to you, right? It might be the things that you may not want to touch because, for some reason it may be difficult to return to that. But what you have lived directly informs what you have to say. So again, what have you lived, right? I'll connect with you guys a little bit in terms of letting you know some elements or key elements of my life that ultimately have informed, my perspective as an artist. And it has a lot to do with what I've lived. So this quote here is a quote by George Jackson. Anybody know George Jackson? In brevity, George Jackson is a former member of the Black Panther Party. Shout out George Jackson, shout out Huey P. Newton, shout out Fred Hampton. George Jackson had a wonderful quote that has always stayed with me once I understood what it meant. It's called, "They will never count me amongst the broken men." Now, I grew up with this quote right above my bedroom door without having any sense of what it meant at all. I have two older brothers. They're significantly older than me. One of them, when I was 11, my middle brother was 17, and the other one was 18. And so the 18-year-old was part of a wonderful program for Black and brown youth here in the city called the Brotherhood Sister Soul, which basically went into at-risk high schools and basically provided the services that the high schools themselves are not providing to these kids, helping them find each other, helping them find a sense of purpose, helping them find a sense of, understanding in terms of what they need to communicate, how they can strive for a better positioning in their lives, and understand that just because their educational environment is failing them doesn't mean that they should fail themselves per se. So shout out Kari and Jason for running that program. Wonderful program, the Brotherhood Sister Soul. And my brother was part of the inaugural chapter. And each chapter had to choose a quote, and they would kind of choose it as the banner, right? That they would kind of like represent their chapter. And my brother chose that one as one being by George Jackson, saying, "They'll never count me amongst the broken men." Now, there was one day when I finally started to understand what this quote meant. And I think it was a day that has changed my life forever. It was a day in the summer of 2002. I was 11 years old, and I wanted to get some cookies and cream ice cream because it was summertime. and it was very hot. And the cookies and cream ice cream from Kennedy's Fried Chicken down on 153rd was some of the best cookies and cream ice cream you're ever gonna have. You can't go there now because gentrification is taking it away, so there's no way to find it, but it was great. And so it was a Saturday. I told my mom, I was like, I wanna go get, me at 150, go get the ice cream. And my mom was like, you already had 3 ice creams this week. I'm not giving you no 150. And so I was like, all right, well, I gotta figure it out. So then I was able to gather $1 from the different coins that I had in my room, but I was missing 50 cents. Couldn't find it anywhere else. Was getting frustrated. My mom was in her room. I knew there was a ton of coins in there, but I couldn't go in because she said I couldn't get the ice cream, right? So, or at least I was gonna have to figure it out myself. So went under the fridge. I was like, I remember there's always coins under the fridge. Found 2 coins, got them, 150, ready to go. So I go downstairs on my way to the Kennedy Fried Chicken. I pass by a group of young men that friends of my brothers, older guys, like, between the ages of maybe like 17, 21, around there. They were shooting dice on the street, right? That's kind of their pastime, is just hanging out on the block doing different things. And, I dapped them up like any other day. I said hello, I told them I was gonna go get some ice cream. I had some basketball shorts on, white t-shirt, flip-flops on. It's the summertime, New York City, it's amazing. And so I'm walking, right? I go, Kennedy's Fried Chicken, get the single scoop, ask for the single scoop because double scoop was $2.25. And I didn't have $2.25. So I remember Aboubakar, who was a wonderful Senegalese man that worked there. I said, that double scoop is really good though. And then he looked at me, he was like, I was like, I don't got $2.25 though. He was like, all right, it's all right, just, I'll take care of you. It's the summertime. So he gives me double scoop. I come back, I'm walking down the sidewalk, I'm happy, right? I'm eating my ice cream. So I'm walking, I'm getting close to the block where the boys are, and I hear this loud screeching sound. It's like a deep disruption of like your everyday reality. Like it was such a foreign sound. Like I had not heard this before. And what I hear is like the sound of a tire, like sounded like a massive tire. Screeching sound, turn to the left, I see these 2 black Ford vehicles come up diagonal to the block. They're not parking, they're just double parking. I see a series of plainclothes white policemen come out with guns pointed at the boys that were shooting dice, right? And I remember I'm right in the middle. I don't know if it's that they didn't calculate the timing right, or maybe they're, proving the imperfection or the fallible nature of the NYPD, but definitely probably shouldn't pull up on the block when the little boy is right in front of you. But they did, and so I'm there. They say put your hands up to the kids, but I just heard put your hands up. So I put my hands up. I'm 11 years old. I'm like, all I got is an ice cream, so it can't be with me. But whatever, my hands are up. And I remember I'm just standing there. It's frozen. When I think of it in hindsight, it kind of reminds me of like a Hayao Miyazaki movie where it's like, everything's frozen, and then all you hear is the kid. Because after they said, they were like, all right, just go ahead. It's obviously not with you. I remember just all you heard was my flip-flops. In my mind, that's all I heard. Just my flip-flops on the concrete, just walking through, right? And I saw these, my homies, my brother's friends, I saw them there, in this very vulnerable position. And I remember going upstairs, going to the 2nd floor. We lived in apartment 2B. And I look out from the window, and what I see is all 4 of those guys being, catered off in handcuffs into the black Ford vehicle. And I never saw any of those 4 neighbors again. Never saw them again. I don't know what happened. I was a kid, so nobody was really explaining to me exactly what took place. But I remember talking to my older brother later that day about what happened, and he pointed at the banner above our bedroom, and he said, now you understand what that means. And I think maybe at the time, not entirely, but I started to gradually get a sense of what a broken man could be, or what the broken men, right, could identify as. Who could those people be? And I think that quote has always stayed with me because the idea is, there is a certain conditioning, there's a certain vulnerability that us in communities of color can experience. And I think the idea is like, I'm charging my films with this notion of those who have been broken or those who refuse to be broken, who are members of my community. And I think I wouldn't understand that without that experience, and I wouldn't have understood this quote without having had that experience, right? So I always look back to this whenever I'm thinking about my work, whenever I'm thinking about what I want to imbue it with, because I think this quote is very central to what I'm trying to express, what I'm trying to explore, right? Shout out to George Jackson, member of the Black Panther Party. So again, The idea is, what have you lived and how does it inform what you have to say? I feel like this quote is something I grew up looking at. Then it reminds me of an experience that I've had, and then that directly is able to influence the type of things that I want to explore and depict in my storytelling. This is the hallway of the apartment building where we're going down. This is the low angle shot of the stairway. So we'll always flip things in this class though. So even though you should explore from the personal, you should also question the personal, right? We should all question our personal biases at all times, especially now. Because just because it's something that I experience doesn't necessarily mean that I have like an unquestionable right to just share it. I mean, I can, like, we are all free. We happen to live in a country where, like, yes, some of those freedoms are supposedly available to us and they do get tested on a daily basis, but generally it's a free country, right? So we can express what we want. But I do think we need to assess any shortcomings, any inefficiencies, any gaps, any biases that exist in the very things that we feel are so important and personal to us that we want to share, right? What elements of our manner of expression are ultimately coming up short in the larger global cultural conversation, right? So you can create from, but you also need to question the personal. You need to personally investigate it, right? I think one of the things that I always kind of notice with some of my film students at NYU, I've been here since 2021, is like people will kind of like, especially in the screenwriting classes, will just kind of, they'll write something that they've seen in the city, right? And then they'll cast, they'll write in the homeless man as like being somebody who's like Hispanic or black or, he doesn't have a name, and it's like, it's a pretty caricature-esque description of a character compared to the rest of the characters in the script who are based off of people that these students actually know, right? And so, but their thought is like, well, I live in New York City and I'm like putting this thing in there, right? And it's an innocent mistake perhaps, because for them, they're just depicting what they understand. But the idea is, why is the homeless man black? Why is he Hispanic? Why doesn't he even have a name in the script, right? If he doesn't have a name in the script, should he be in there? Do you need that character? Is the character just wallpaper? Is it just decorative, right? Is that how you want to treat a certain human being? Is that how you want to lead with empathy as an artist? Again, it's not a punitive set of questions, but it is a set of questions that you need to put yourself through as you're evaluating your work so that you can actually be as conscientious as possible as an artist. Because ideally today, as an artist, you're part of the conversation. But if you're not part of the conversation, then you're not really making any kind of effective art. But in order to be part of the conversation, you need to understand the landscape and the ecosystem that you're creating within. And part of that is understanding your own shortcoming, your own bias. So one of the things that I had to kind of come in to realize was 6 years ago when I made my debut feature film in the Jabon, Dominican Republic. This is the westernmost town of the country, of the island of Hispaniola, that is about 10 minutes away from Haiti. Oh, now this is broken. All right. So about 10 minutes away from Haiti. It's all right, I'll just use this one. And I remember we went out there with a production. It was about a year after I'd graduated from film school. And I was trying to combine all the different scenarios that could ultimately lead me to create a great work of art. I was like, well, I need to afford what I'm making. I need to be able to like work in a way that's like in the parameters of what I've already done, right? And I was like, I need to work with a crew that I'm familiar with. So what that factors into is basically going to a town that my family obviously is steeped in. And obviously, so I'm not paying for locations or, it's a place that I'm familiar with. But also, I don't know filmmakers out there, so I'm bringing my, fellow alumni and colleagues from here. And I think that you look at some of these images here, you look at these TVs. These TVs are things that are being sold on the binational market between Haiti and Dominican Republic. And these are ultimately like, these are luxury items that local citizens are going to purchase. And I think it's interesting is like, what was the budget for our film? How much did our Alexa camera cost? What was in everybody's personal bank account when we were in this town? Which is like the average monthly salary is $300. I could probably guarantee you that at least one person on the crew might have had more than 800,000, right? So it's like, it's not punitive, right? Because this is one of the most expensive universities in the world. Like, this is just a reality. But it's something to be aware of, because you don't want to find yourself on a stage talking about understanding a community, but then also not understanding how there are inherent kind of systemic issues that problematize your very representation or depiction or engagement with that community. And again, I am no more innocent than this than any of you, because we are, as filmmakers, as art makers, we are in a privileged space. Most of the world cannot choose to just express themselves artistically. We have that privilege. It is a deep privilege that we have. So if we have that privilege, that comes with a certain level of responsibility. So we need to engage with what is it that we ultimately are blind to in our own creation. Filmmaking is a very expensive medium, right? I always think it's a very interesting thing that it costs so much to make a movie. And so if you're going to tell a story about something that maybe is, culturally viable, think about the material means necessary or required to ultimately make that film. So that's something you got to think about. I want to talk about questioning not just yourself, but also questioning the place that you're making a film in. So we were out there in Dominican Republic. We were out there on the border of Haiti and DR. And I think one of the main things was trying to point out the discrepancy between what the racial demographic looked like in the town and what the racial presentation of the country was, of like who looks Dominican, who is Dominican, who's the country like put on their like beer commercials or like their like, Banco Popular commercials, which is like a local bank there, right? I was noticing, I was like, none of the people in this town look Dominican, quote unquote, but they are, right? Like this is a town with a pretty robust population. And so it brought me to think of this Charles P. Linscott quote, which comes from a wonderful essay that he writes in this book called Devotion by Garrett Bradley, the wonderful filmmaker. And Linscott is writing about the wonderful kind of semi-experimental documentary film called Symbiopsychotaxoplasm. And it's a film that's very fascinating. He says that the fictive essentialisms of race emerge in large part through processes of looking, right? So it's not to say that race doesn't exist, obviously it does, but it's essentialisms, the meaning that we place on it, right? Whether it be class divides, whether it be things that ultimately like are reinforced for people based off of racial cues to divide or to separate or to like empower one group and not empower another. All of those things are relatively fictitious, and a lot of them are kind of buttressed, right, and reinforced through the process of looking. So if the process of looking is aiding prejudicial mindsets or ways of thinking, then maybe we need to change or evaluate the way in which our films look. I don't mean the way in which our films look visually, like it's like a double meaning. I mean the way in which our films, like as a verb, look. How do our films themselves observe, right? And then in turn, how do they look as nouns as well? Like think about both of those things. And so that leads me to this photograph. Shout out my brother, took a lot of these photos. And shout out the Carpenters Union in New York City. My brother's a carpenter, but he likes to take photographs, kind of clear his mind. And I thought this photo was really powerful because this is a Dominican man, this is a Haitian boy. And like ultimately, if you were like asking just the general Dominican public, they wouldn't really make a distinction between the two because of the built-in racism, so they would call both of them Haitian. But like, to me, this points out very concretely the sort of artificial division of the island, which is basically like, it wasn't based off of lineage, it wasn't based off of race, it was like quite literally based off of different colonial powers that decided this is our plot of land, this is our plot of land, and basically them vying for those two things. And then other human beings who are born out of that system ultimately being victims of that, and then perpetuating different kind of class dynamics where now one is getting his shoes signed by another person who might very well be an ancestor of his, right? And so my thought in evaluating that, this is the thought part of everything, right? So then how do I put it into practice? That was basically the next question. And so I thought the way that I could highlight some of these racial disparities between the presentation of what Dominican is and what I'm seeing it to be in the town was basically in the casting choices, and also between some of the filmmaking choices I made. So I'm going to show you guys a clip from the opening of the film, and we'll see if we could see some of these choices that are being evaluated in the art, in the thinking, right? That then make its way into the practice, which is the verb, the expression of the art. You know, the art is immaterial until it becomes something. It only becomes something through practice.
Porque escúchame, tú eres mi hermano menor y siempre lo vas a hacer. Cuando yo te digo algo, tú escuchas, aprende sencillo, como aquella noche. Escúchame que estoy hablando contigo, compadre. No tuviste nada que ver con esa vaina, así que estate tranquilo. Ese tipo se murió por mi culpa. Fui yo que la cagué, tú no tuviste nada que ver con esa vaina. Ven, dame un abrazo.
Hoy reprendan el mal con la fuerza y la fe. Que recoja Satanás que ha llegado San Miguel. Ese es un ángel divino que el Señor nos los mandó. Bajo del cielo a la tierra y hoy a Satanás venció.
But somebody tell me why the dissolves based off of what I'm saying, based off what I mentioned. The idea of like these different lineages maybe blending with each other, right, over time, right? Yeah, that was one of the main ideas to do that. And so what you'll notice though as well is the two boys that we casted as the younger version of the brothers are actually in real life Haitian. And then the two actors, one of them is half Haitian, and then the other one is Dominican. And so the idea was like, even in the casting choices, to sort of try to nod or point in the direction of like, you know, first off, everybody was neighbors anyway, like people were living in the same town anyway, but the idea was to try to almost like embed the complications or the contradictions of colonial lineage within the casting itself. And within the music, what we used was the Spanish language being in that music, but a lot of the rhythm that's coming from that is ultimately rooted in voodoo, which is much more present and openly prominent in Haiti compared to in DR. So that was kind of part of the idea for why we actually ended up casting in this way. And so it brings me to one of the things that I want to talk about. I mentioned Garrett Bradley in the book Devotion, and this is an excerpt from an interview that we did for my annual publication that I do. Is called Homesickness, a BIPOC Cinema Zine. And Garrett Bradley, we talked to her, just so you guys know, you should definitely watch Garrett Bradley, Oscar-nominated filmmaker, made the film Time, made the film America, Alone, very, very incredible film, made the Naomi Osaka film for Netflix. We were talking with Garrett, and one of the things that she said or asked was basically, what is it that I'm disseminating ideologically through aesthetics, through narrative? I thought that was a really important question. I think that's one of the main questions you guys should ask yourselves. To me, if there's only one question that you leave this classroom with, I think this is the question to ask yourself, right? Because Garrett's entire premise in that book is based not in our zine, but in this book. Basically is that images are belief systems. Images contain belief systems. And so the idea is like, if these belief systems are rooted in patriarchy, if they're rooted in colonialism, if they're rooted in whatever systemic issue is present, right, in the world, then the art that we're making, the narratives that we're making, may very well contain some of these biases, may very well contain that because they're born out of the system and that we're living in, right? So it's important to ask yourself, what are you disseminating? What are you communicating? Both on an ideological level, but also maybe even on a cultural level, right? Through your narrative and through even the aesthetics. You may have a narrative that supposedly says the right thing, but if your narrative is rooted in a visual schematic that is inherently problematic, then it's in conflict with your narrative, right? So I'm gonna show you guys a scene from a film that I was working on a couple years ago that I made in order to like literally just like prove that I could make a traditional film. It was like, I'm gonna do everything by the book. I'm gonna like shoot exactly how I'm supposed to shoot.
What's up, brother? How you doing tonight?
Good.
Good. You coming from school?
Yeah.
It's kind of late. Where you go to school?
Clinton.
Go to Clinton. Clinton. Yo, okay, man. Look, I know some dudes that went to Clinton, man. Used to have all the baddest bitches out there. What's up, man? They still got baddies out there? I mean, you don't gotta act like you don't know.
I mean, like, they got a couple, I guess. I guess, yeah.
Oye, no te hagas inocente, loco. Ya, tiene una cara de tigre. What's up? You don't mess with the girls like that out there? What's the vibe, bro?
I mean, they
I'm playing with you, bro. I'm playing with you, man. Look, I'm gonna need you to step out the car for a second, though. I'm gonna answer a couple questions, all right?
Well, I gotta step it up.
You'll be quick, man. You'll be all right. Let's go. Get out the car.
So the jumbo shrimp was $3 though, right?
No, it's $6.50.
But it used to be $3.
It's always been $6.
And
Sesame chicken?
sesame chicken is $9, right?
Yeah.
Is this your car?
Yeah.
It's in your name?
Under my name? Yo, what are you even saying right
Is it
now?
registered under your name?
I have insurance.
Okay, let us see the insurance then. Registration too, go ahead.
And the beef with broccoli is $6.
No. Beef is 9. Chicken with broccoli is 6.
For real? Let me just...
You want to cancel the baby shrimp?
You say you bought it last month?
Yeah.
What was the dealership?
Yo, why you asking me all these questions for?
Cálmate. Cálmate, bro.
Yo, I am calm. I just want to know why you're asking me so many questions for.
Because you're driving a stolen vehicle.
So, yo, I bought this car.
Okay? Not saying you stole it, but it is stolen.
Did you buy it from a dealership?
No.
Then who do you buy it from?
The fuck, bro?
Tranquilo, mi hermano. Just answer the question, bro. Who would you buy the car from?
Yo, I don't have to answer that.
If you don't tell us who you bought it from, then we don't know that you bought it.
This is some fucking bullshit, all right? I bought the fucking car. I bought the car.
Okay, then from who? Hey, man, con calma. Te quiero ayudar, just help. Answer the question, who'd you get the car from?
Don't touch me. Yo, don't fucking touch me. Don't fucking touch me.
Hey, I got him, man. Yeah, man. Stay right there, man. Good. Now look what we doing. We're here on 157 in Courtney. We got a suspect here for a stolen vehicle.
So I have this medium shot, right? It's like, it's fine, you know, it's great. It's a nice medium shot, all right? I have this close-up, right? Now, I think I put Y next to each one because I wasn't asking myself why originally when I was assessing it. I was trained in the film program, so I'm like, okay, I'm gonna use the medium shot because I wanna show the environment. I wanna show these two brothers over the shoulder looking at each other. And the next one, I'm gonna use this close-up. I'm gonna zoom in because it's a highly emotional moment. I'm finding those as my justifications. But then I was also not assessing or asking myself why close-ups or medium shots were generally used or where they came from to begin with. Now, this isn't like a misleading or like false lead to show you that mediums and close-ups are inherently wrong. That's not what I'm doing here. They're fine. But the idea is that we should ask where they come from. We should know what is the root of the very language that we use to speak cinema or to make cinema, right? And that leads us to Birth of a Nation. 10 years ago when I was like doing school, that wasn't actually the leading narrative on this film. Like, sure, it was like problematic. There was some stuff that was being talked about, but it was always understood to be the pioneering work that basically established film language. You know, in terms of like dramatic use of close-ups, as you just saw in the film that I made that wasn't referencing like, you know, consciously a Birth of a Nation at all, right? Like I didn't go to that film and be like, oh, let me see how to use a close-up. But that is where the tradition in part is born out of, right? And so same thing, I didn't show you guys the scene, but when you go online later when you have this lecture, you'll see the scene uses a lot of parallel action and cross-cutting, which I thought was like such a dynamic way of doing it. That was pretty much established in Birth of a Nation, right? So it's a complicated relationship that Birth of a Nation has with film lineage and canon in general, because it is one of the foundational works on establishing and almost writing the film language that we still use to this day. But as these two gentlemen said in the front here, and also our friend in the back, you know, talking about, you know, Woodrow Wilson celebrating in the White House and it being something that ultimately had catastrophic consequences on the racial dynamics in our country, because ultimately there were people who felt emboldened enough to carry out the actions that they saw on screen and ultimately, you know, make that into reality in the way that race and shaping the way that race relations took place. Now, we should also look at the effects that this ideology has on the way in which Black Americans are depicted on screen. So I do want to show you a scene from the film. I think it's important to look at this and understand that there is a deep power in the images that you create. There is a deep and long-lasting, perpetuating power in the images that you create. Because everybody in this room comes to NYU Film School, right? And you ultimately probably want to be a successful artist in some way. Maybe you want to be a filmmaker, maybe you want to be a photographer, maybe you want to do cinematography, whatever it might be. But you want to be part of the conversation ultimately, right? You want to make the films that ultimately shape the discourse for the year, right? Or for the next 5 years, right? As people, you know, are watching that film. So just understand that whatever you're putting into that film has a perpetuating effect. Right? Because there's a film called Nothing But a Man by the filmmaker Michael Roemer, also made in a collaboration with Robert M. Young. And Nothing But a Man, one of the things that they tried to do in this film was they said, we wanted to frame Black Americans visually in close-up, because really, throughout cinema, that was not considered to be standard practice, right? It wasn't, you know, the close-up is used a lot of the times for a certain kind of level of emotional impact or effect, right? And you may frame these faces if you want to identify more with the characters, you want to relate more to the characters. And this is a film made in 1964, right? So you count back, you go back to Birth of a Nation, 1915, and you're seeing how long, right, certain ideologies that are embedded within imagery can perpetuate for a long time and ultimately end up shaping the film practice of an entire industry, right, in relation to how to depict a certain group of people. So think about the power of your imagery. Think about the power of your casting. Think about the way in which you frame, the way in which you look, right? Just take that extra step to self-evaluate before you make the choice, right? That's the idea. Because these images do have belief systems, as Garrett talked about, and they do disseminate certain thought processes, right? Those thought processes could also be very powerful, and they could also be very, you know, empowering, right? But, you know, it's important to think and reassess in that way. So what about someone probably in the group or here is probably like, damn, like, I'm walking in art and practice. I didn't know this was what art and practice is gonna be about. Like, I thought it was just art. Like, I just want to make movies at NYU. It's fine. Like, it's just cinema, right? You know, there's got to be somebody that's probably like, it is really not all that deep. But it is deep, though. Hideo Kojima says this. He says, if we don't feel something after putting the game down, I don't think the games industry will ever escape the realm of just being games. And I think if you replace games with cinema, I think it's very pertinent to us as well, right? If there is not something that we as an audience are ultimately going to leave thinking in a different way about our world, the way that we almost contribute to or exist in our ecosystem, if that's not changing after we watch the film, then the film is just a film. It's just cinema. It's just entertainment. And that, I think, is not something that only human beings can do. If it's simply just making a movie, we all know that there's a full other entity very much alive that can just make a movie, and you don't need a human being to do that. So I think just to make the film is not something that is something that's exclusive to you as human beings anymore. And ultimately, if it's not something that is exclusive to you as human beings, why would you necessarily want to or need to make a film, especially if you just simply want to entertain, right? This leads me to something that Rem Koolhaas talks about. Dutch architect, one of the most important architectural theorists, and also practitioners of the last century. In an essay he talked about called Junk Space, where he's kind of talking about the death of architecture, so to speak, or at least the precarious nature in which, the precarious situation in which architecture finds itself as a field. He has a few quotes that I think could very much be pertinent and relevant to us as practitioners and people as aspiring artists, as filmmakers? Well, not aspiring, you guys are filmmakers. Today, if you decide you're a filmmaker, go out, make a film, you're a filmmaker, just keep doing it. So he says junk space is the body double of space. It undermines resolve, confuses intention with realization, right? Again, if there isn't intention behind what we're doing and we're simply realizing, we're simply regurgitating, then perhaps what we are making is not actually cinema, it might just be a fake form of cinema or a body double of cinema. It says its richness is a terminal hollowness, right? There's a decorativeness, it can feel ornamental, right? You can ultimately have a very beautiful looking film, right? But if there is no essence to it, then it is deeply empty. It's hollow, has nothing to say, right? And therefore structure groans invisibly underneath decoration, right? If a structure is supposed to provide a framework that extends from the spirit of your movie, if it's simply decorative, then it has no spirit, right? And that's why it ultimately welcomes an infinity of virtual populations to non-existent theirs. I always think it's so interesting. We're on the subway train, or on the subway train, on the subway, and you see people on their phones, right? And we're all in a subway car, but everyone's in their own, like, they think they're in another world, they think they're in another realm. But I think that that's very pertinent to what he's saying here. It's almost like these non-existent theirs, right? Which is like, you think you're in this space, but really objectively, you're just on this train, just staring down at this screen, right? So ultimately, let's try to escape from that very sensibility of making, right? And the last thing is, he says it's flamboyant. Junk space is flamboyant, yet unmemorable, like a screensaver. Junk space does not pretend to create perfection. It only creates interest. Its geometries are unimaginable, only makeable. And if you think about spirituality, you think about what we're saying, the ideas of the world are what push humanity forward. If we're going to then manifest things into physical form, the ideas have to be there for us to move forward. Because if the ideas never change, we'd be in a very different civilization right now. I would say that I don't think that what I'm proposing here or asking you guys to think about exists under one framework of what a film. I don't have a particular film in mind or a particular kind of film in mind. What I do have in mind is a way of thinking, right? Which is basically like, if you just said that a film is going to reveal certain different ways of experiencing the world to you, then that's totally fine. But I think ultimately we have to that to me is inherently filmic, right? Whereas like, I think there's a lot of films that are pretending to be films that ultimately are not. And I think if we don't make that distinction, then ultimately our practice is going to be more and more precarious.
But that's subjective, isn't it?
I don't think so, because I think that if we sit down, I think there is something that you could write into ChatGPT or write into Runway that could very much be a great, like a film, right? And I think if you can't make something different from that, then I think that ultimately your position as a filmmaker who is aspiring to get a job or make a work of art that's going to have funding, I think is precarious. I think you have to imbue something that very thing cannot put into creation. And I think that therein lies the difference. So I don't know if it's as subjective as you suggest. Maybe it's figuring out the degree at which something being derivative starts to get broken down, right? If we could start to find the element that doesn't feel derivative, maybe that's when we start to find the truth, right? Let's see. That leads us to Maya Deren. A search for the distinctly filmic. How many people know Maya Deren in the room? Maya Deren, Meshes of the Afternoon. All right, you a Maya Deren fan? Shout out Maya Deren. I love Maya Deren. So let's look at what she says here. She says the development of a distinctive film form consists not in eliminating any of the elements, whether of nature, reality, or the artifices of other arts to which it has access, right? We have access to all these things, other mediums, right? Now we have access to AI. But in relating all these according to the special capacity of film, the manipulations made possible by the fact that it is both a space art and a time art. And, you know, Maya wrote this, you know, in the 40s. So I think she was assessing a medium that was quite different from ours at this point. But I do think it's important that she understands that space and time are two elements that very specifically and concretely almost individuate and almost represent what film is, which is basically like space and time cannot exist in the same way that they exist in a painting and the way that they exist in film. That ultimately you are working with those two components. It reminds me of something David Fincher said when he was talking about directing House of Cards. He didn't say space, but he did say that the essence of directing that show ultimately was a certain formula of basically saying that it's performance over time. That's basically the thing to always kind of understand, human action over time. But there is a relationship between physical embodiment, right? And if you're talking about human action, it does have to be localized in a space. So you're talking about existence within a space and then the passage of time, which is not something that necessarily you have to deal with in a photograph, right? A photograph is almost a fractal or an abstract of a moment of time that you maybe have to imagine. But in a film, you are seeing time pass, right? So I think it's important to understand that those are two qualities that very much identify and individuate film. Let's look at what Maya is actually talking about. Let's see a clip from Meshes of the Afternoon. A film ultimately is this objective phenomenon that we engage with, right? Probably even more so than a book is, because your interpretation of reading a book will be different because the images that I might, render in my mind are not the same you may do in your imagination. But I do think it's very fascinating that ultimately, film could potentially try to convey how subjectivity deeply feels, right? Because I do feel like I've had a dream like this in my own way, which is like you keep trying to make a kind of physical progress and somehow there's this uncanny limitation that isn't true to how we experience the world right now, but ultimately is true to how we experience the world in our dreams in many ways. I think that what's interesting with Maya is that she's using cuts. And one thing I wanted to pose as a final thought about space and time when it comes to film is that I think even when you don't cut, I do think that the quality, like the temporal quality of cinema, is still very much present in what we're watching, what we're engaging with. And we see that in a film called Chinese Portrait by Wang Xiaoshuai, wonderful Chinese filmmaker. And I think I want to look in this shot here and kind of just try to think about the difference in how you feel, right, as a viewer, at the beginning of this compared to the end of this, right? I think that there's a seeming unchanging quality to what we're watching, but I do think that something gradually starts to happen to us as we watch this space evolve and exist over time. That clip always hits me because I think if you surrender yourself to the lack of an expectation for a change, right? Because I think you keep sitting there and you're like, okay, what's going to happen? But then you realize it's not about what's going to happen. It's about what's presently happening. And then as you surrender to that, you start to notice the little flickering light in the left side of the screen. You start to hear the music. And for me, it's always crazy because I never see the guy with the guitar at first. And then I'm like, oh, wait, he's just right there. Like, wait, because I'm focusing on those two guys that are staring at us the whole time, right? And then we have the toast that starts to happen. Then we start to have people walk through the middle of the frame. And then we have people walk through the foreground. And when we realize the repositioning of the camera, we're more aware of it, right? And it's a very interesting thing when you start to surrender yourself to just this kind of still frame and the way that it changes second by second over time. I think it's a deeply filmic shot. It's a deeply filmic moment that I would wonder if it could really exist in any other medium, right? So again, we've been going in different directions, but one of the final things we want to think about is ultimately like, what is distinctively filmic, right? What is unique to our medium, right? I think it's something that, honestly, you all have to ask even more in this day and time than my generation had to ask. Because I think you have a direct kind of threat to your practice, which is basically like, is this something that only human beings can do? Which leads us to the last thing we're going to talk about before we take our quick break, is I want to ask us if cinema is still a medium or if it's more so a sensibility, right? It's something that's really been preoccupying me over the past year, just really thinking about, the fact that if, 50 years ago, the ability to record something was really something you could really only do with the camera, right? But a camera was something that you went out and you loaded film into and you had, right? You also had to get somebody to do sound externally. Now, because it exists on here, I think our relationship to this medium is something that is ever evolving. And again, I always try to present you with questions that are somewhat contradicting each other, because I just asked you to find out what's distinct and specific to a film medium, and now I'm questioning whether film is a medium at all, right? But I think it's important for you to always kind of grapple with those contradictions. We are in the age of contradiction. We are in the age of paradox. And it's interesting to go back to what Garrett Bradley said. Promise is not a plug for Garrett Bradley, but she's a great filmmaker. She did say that a lot of the times she's trying to figure out or solve a paradox, right? That's kind of like the root of where she finds herself directorially when she's trying to make something. She's like, there's some paradox that I'm trying to solve through my film. I think that we need to understand that contradictions and paradox are very inherent to our process. And I think they're married, they're a cousin of counterpoint, which I think is at the core of cinema, a core of great art actually as well. So it leads us to something called the Diary of Filmmakers Manifesto, which also features in my zine, and it is written by a person that will be our guest after our break, a wonderful filmmaker named Lerebours. And I want to read through these points. So point 1 of the Diary Filmmakers Manifesto is that you should depict your surroundings both internal and external. I think that's interesting, that surroundings could be internal, right? What are my internal surroundings, right? I would always think that that which is surrounding me is something that is outside of me, right? But I think more and more so, going back to that thing I was talking about on the train, right? I think there are certain things that in our interiority are also maybe outside of ourselves. Right? Now, I don't know if that's exactly what Jard meant by that, but that's what that elicited in my own, thinking and engagement with this. We can all ask Jard if I even know what I'm talking about when we talk to him. The second one is become the camera. I thought that was really interesting, especially we just talked about where a camera is no longer really a camera anymore, or a camera can take on so many different shapes and forms. I wonder about this idea that given that it is so readily available to us, maybe there is more of a direct relationship we could have with the camera, right? And I think that was one of the things that inspired me about reading that point of this. Again, I'm just providing with my reading on this, but also write this down because this is an objective manifesto that Jard wrote that I think you should imbue your own meaning into. The third one is use your lens not only to create and destroy, but also to maintain and preserve. I think that correlation between creation and destruction is very fascinating. When you go back to think about junk space, about simply creating is maybe not necessarily a formative or forward-thinking, almost like a productive act, maybe preserving and maintaining that which already exists, that which is imbued in our memory, our lineage, is maybe just as important as putting out something new into the world. The fourth is sample, collect, resurrect found footage, which almost extends from that third point. The fifth is the one that really trips me up, is like, tell the story through any medium necessary. That's like that's like the head blown emoji. I'm like, whoa, because it's like, I look at that and I'm like, but this is the filmmaker's manifesto. So this is the filmmaker's medium, isn't this film? But that's why it brings me to that question. It's like, oh, but maybe film is not a medium anymore. If ultimately in the filmmaker's manifesto, you could tell your story through any medium necessary, which means that you maybe could tell a film without it even being shot on a camera. I mean, Good Kid, Mad City is a short film by Kendrick Lamar, right? But it's not a film. So I think that's really interesting. And the last one is to be honest and fearless, which I think is something that to me is a maxim that's very important for all artists, for us to all follow. So what's exciting now is we'll be able to watch 2 examples of what I believe to be diary filmmaking, in 2 of Jard's films, and then we'll sit down and talk with him and kind of see, it's kind of the practice portion of this lecture, which is like the art portion was the talking and the thinking, right? And now we'll be able to see if we can engage with work that is actively being made itself. And I think what's really exciting about these films is that in terms of resources, they're actually quite similar to what you guys can all make in this first year, right? Yeah, you don't have your C300 or your C200, you don't have your Alexa that you have in your senior year, but you do have the materials to make extremely personal and extremely truthful art. So I want to start off with the questions, but I also want you all mainly to ask the questions yourselves. I guess the best jump off point is basically, I want to first ask, like, with the manifesto, right? Like, where did that come from? Like, where does it start, in terms of like, how does it originate? Yeah, like, is it something you had before you even made these films, or is it kind of retroactive?
Yeah, it was definitely retroactive. I'm also a practicing Buddhist, so I feel like that's something I try to really enact a lot in my practice. So a lot of it came from sort of ideas around mindfulness, and also just ideas of like, yeah, just like this tendency of creation and destruction, but also I think the most important thing is maintenance, which is something I speak to in one of the points. Yeah, so I was really inspired just by a lot of Zen books that I read.
What does it mean to become the camera? That was the one that tripped me out. I mean, the other one did too, but what does it mean to become the camera?
Yeah, I feel like it's all about just really, just like when I make work, I try to really just allow myself to inhabit it as much as I can. Like I remember when I made Coconut, the film that y'all watched, the first time, like my original cut was like, it was like 30 minutes long, and I sent it to my homie, and he was like, "This is edited like a WWE match," which I still have no clue what he meant, but it just like put so much fear in my heart that I had to really go back over months and just really like sit with the footage and just really allow it to develop organically. So yeah.
Do you think that cinema is a medium still? Because you kind of said we could make films through any medium. So do you think films can be in music? Films can be in painting? Do you think there's like a sculpture that's a film? Like that's kind of like, that's the thing that caused me to question.
Yeah. I think especially with like with social media and with our access to media, to just like filmmaking tools like our camera and also our microphones on our phone. I think that film is really very contextual now, because I teach a class at a community center near my crib, and recently I had the kids make something, and something I realized is that like there's a really thin line between making content and making film sometimes, especially because of the quality of equipment that we have at our disposal all the time. I did a residency recently, and something that they spoke about was this idea that like a sculpture is anything that that you interact with on the same plane as you. So anything that like is also 3D. So it can be a video, you know, it can be like made out of materials. But I guess what I was thinking is that like I think video / film, I think it's really all contextual. Like, yeah.
I mean, that's interesting, because I think in a way then it's almost like we have to fight harder to truly distinguish like one from the other, right? To distinguish content from cinema or content from film, right? Maybe because of the democratization of the materials, which is somewhat ironic in a way, considering that like there was a time where people were like, man, like if only everybody could just have a camera. It's like, well, everyone has a camera now. So it's like, you know, how do we find the distinction? I want to talk about the work a little bit. There's a confessional quality to Lerebours, the first film that we watched. And I just want to thank you for your courage for making that film. I just feel like, to me, it was like no holds barred, like just as honest and true as possible. And I kind of want to talk to you, especially because this is an art and practice class, is like, can you talk about the process of writing this narration? Like, I feel like because of how vulnerable it is, like where do you have to arrive at, like emotionally, to even be able to put those words down? Like, is it one sitting? Is it, you know, I'm just curious about how you go about writing that.
Yeah, so I actually started writing Lerebours in like 2018 or 2019, so like a long time before I actually put the film together. So outside of my practice as a filmmaker, I studied creative writing in college. So my background is in like poetry and creative nonfiction. So what happened is that I had a commission piece for a magazine that year in 2024, and I wrote Lerebours. And then I kind of just had this footage of my cousin and his dad at the festival, and I was just sitting on it for a while because I kept trying to write these like really happy, like empowering sort of like monologues to go along with it. But then I was hanging out with my friend, and he was like, "Oh, you have this piece you wrote, and this footage depicts like a father and his son." And I was like, yeah, like it does kind of work, and it kind of just worked.
I think what's interesting about that piece though is that, to me, it's like there's a limited resource, so to speak, which is like you have the footage you have, and then like in a way you sort of have to imbue the rest of the film with what you're saying, so to speak. But that actually created an interesting dissonance, because to me, the narration is literally describing other events that are not on the screen. And so then there's this interesting counterpoint or unison, right? It's like there's almost like a compound effect between what we're seeing and then what we're seeing when we hear the story. And it's like it's just interesting where like there's this meshing of the two things where oftentimes it's tricky to narrate something, right? And describe another scenario when there's imagery that we're seeing. But nonetheless, it kind of like still worked. So was that something you were concerned about? Like, you know, like, are people gonna get confused?
Yeah, I talked to my homie Xenia, who's like a really amazing filmmaker.
Shout out Xenia Matthews. Shout out Xenia.
And she was like, you're not doing enough with like the filmic language, and I was like, what does that mean? But like I understand what she's saying because the image doesn't necessarily progress to reflect what I'm talking about. But in order to sort of like, I guess make up for that was part of why I had the framing of it being autofiction. And that I'm sort of taking found footage that I from my childhood and then using what I had in order to create the film. Which some people have actually thought that's me in the film before, but it's not me. But yeah, I feel like autofiction is really helpful in that because sometimes you really just have what you have and you can't go out and get more footage or you can't capture a moment and you just have to construct it out of what you have already.
And I would say that I'm not sure I even would want you to have more. Like I feel like I don't know if the film is better if it doesn't have that limitation, in my opinion. I have two more questions before we open it up. Is you going into Coconut, you have, you know, you told me that you did, you know, you kind of started off almost like rapping and in music before you started doing film. Yeah. And like I feel like when I started watching that, it was, you know, I was just hearing you rhyme. I was like, oh, Jar could spit. Cause I was seeing, like I was hearing the rhythm, you know what I'm saying? So how does your practice on a musical level inform the filmmaking, like your approach to filmmaking?
Yeah, it's funny. When I was like y'all's age, I was like making rap music in Atlanta, and my homie who I was making music with like sent me our old mixtape, and it was terrible. It was so bad. It was really nice to listen to like as a time capsule, but it was really terrible. But I will say that's something that like writing raps for so long imbued in me is just like, yeah, it's just like having a sort of understanding of how rhyme works and also just really being able to play around with language because I feel like so much of rapping is literally just making words do whatever you want them to do. And I'm not afraid to use words in ways that maybe they shouldn't traditionally be used whenever I write anything. Cause fuck the English language. Yeah. I shouldn't be speaking English right now.
That's true.
Or French. My name's French. Why is my name French?
Yeah, it's true. It's a very good question. I think it's interesting that about your approach to filmmaking because I feel like you have almost like existed in spaces that are, you know, universally seen as legitimate. I mean, you were, you know, Lincoln Center Film Artist Academy, right? Member, right? Yeah. Last year with our friend Kevin as well, which is a very prestigious program. It's kind of done in unison with New York Film Festival, right? Yeah. Like, and I feel like it's interesting because to me, it's not like your work changed after making that or after being part of that program or before being a part of it. Like, I feel like you have been compelling the world to either accept you or not accept you on your own terms with your work. So I'm curious about, like, especially as like our students, you know, very much the track that we kind of train them in is like, you know, aspire to make your film, train hard enough to make it to Sundance or make it to Toronto or make it to Tribeca or whatever. And like, that's the path, right? And it's like, you've got into those spaces, right? Or those kinds of spaces, but it's almost like, it's not like you've changed the filmmaking to do that, right? Like you were making this whether you got in or not, right? So I'm curious, how do you think about these institutions that kind of like, I guess, legitimize us as artists, and how should we relate to them?
Yeah, I think something that's really important is just recognizing that like these institutions don't run without us. And also recognizing that it's important to have your feet in more than one world, because something that I've definitely been venturing into is more like the art world outside of the film world. So it's like when the film world isn't fucking with me, then I just do the art world. And then maybe I'll step into galleries or museums, you know, whatever it is. What else?
And it's ironically
I had a good thought, but I don't remember.
Well, it might help you is that ironically, by deviating to the art world, then the film world fucks with you again. It's like, wait, I really like that painting that Jar did. It's like you didn't like me before I did the painting, but now you do, which is it sort of has that reverse effect. Do we have any questions from you guys?
When I was finishing up my undergrad program, I made this I made my thesis film, and I got like way too much input from a bunch of different people, and the film that I put out was terrible and didn't feel like me at all. And after that, I became like very precious about my work. I didn't want to share it with people as much. I didn't want to like ask for feedback as much. But what I realized is that ultimately, like, I'm the final say on whatever I make. So it's like you could get feedback from someone, it could be phenomenal. Something that my English teacher in high school used to say to me that I think is always really helpful is that if there's a room of 100 people, maybe 10 of those people will be good readers or a good audience for you who will understand what you're going for. And it doesn't mean that they'll be like, oh, this is perfect or this is great. But it'll be like, okay, like I understand your intention. And I think that's really important, just like recognizing that like everyone's opinion doesn't matter. I make art that speaks to me, but okay, so here's what I'll say. I think that I'll use Coconut as an example, right? Like when I finished Coconut, I was like, this film is so great. I'm so proud of myself. And then I got into at first I got into like one film festival and I got rejected from like over 20, like immediately. And but that one film festival, Film Diary NYC, which is a great festival, those two people who program it became like two of my best friends. And then eventually I also got into this film festival, Third Horizon, and Third Horizon took me to screen at BAM.
Great festival.
And now I'm streaming on their platform. So I guess what I'm saying is that like I use filmmaking as a way to connect with other people. I think especially when you're talking about something as personal as like a grandparent or like a loved one dying, I think that's something that a lot of people could relate to. And like you never know who in the audience it'll like strike a chord with them. And I think it's also a good way to sort of honor the memory of like, you know, my grandmother told me. I always think about films in sort of two categories. I mean, there's a lot more, and I don't mean to make it a binary, but I think that like there are films that sort of lead you towards community, and there are films that sort of like add to your life, and then there are films that more so add to your career. And I think most films that we create can fall into like one of those categories or both. So like so even if you make something that like you like and like no one else likes, like it's never gonna just be you, is what I'm saying. Like there's always gonna be someone that's gonna be like, maybe it won't be like everyone, but there'll be someone that'll be like, yo, I love this, and they'll just, you know what I mean? So yeah, I think for me a lot of it is like lack of resources, which I've sort of been able to lean into. Like both of the films you guys saw were made for like what, like under $300 probably. I find that like I do think that there are things that are lost sometimes by taking like our own experiences and then putting them onto the veil of a character. Like for example, when I showed a film by my father, Lerebours, I feel like that also becomes an open space for folks to talk about like people in their family who are experiencing addiction, or for people to feel safe to talk to me about what they're experiencing with addiction. Versus like if it was a character, it could very much be possible that I was like trying to sensationalize addiction, or that I was just trying to comment on something I don't actually have a personal connection or knowledge about. So I feel like it's important sort of establishing that trust with your audience, or people who interface with your work. Yeah, so both with Coconut and with Lerebours, I shot and like edited and like did all that stuff myself, but I had someone come in and like make the music. So because for so much of a process it's just me like by myself just sort of making the work, I don't necessarily realize like how personal and vulnerable it is. And then I remember the first time I played Lerebours, I remember being in the room and just feeling so like exposed, at least the first few times. I don't feel that way anymore because now it's screened like at a few different festivals and places. But but yeah, but yeah, I think it is somewhat therapeutic, and it's a good way to get the message across some people. Like I showed it to my dad, and he enjoyed it. I think it could be a little bit ambiguous in the film. He's not dead. So the people who have made music on my films, they're both like close friends of mine I used to make like rap music with. So I already like sort of trust them to come into my world, and some of it is already things that they know about me. But outside of it, I will say when you make such personal work, I feel like that changes the atmosphere of how people discuss it. Like I would love if someone like watched my grandma film and was like, this film's terrible, I hate it so much, like fuck your grandma. But like but it's kind of just like because it's such like personal thing. Even when I go on Letterboxd, like no one's ripping me to shreds because they're like, oh, it's about his grandma or whatever. Like so yeah, I think that personal cinema just like is interacted with on a different plane, if that makes sense. Like than say like if you made a film that was fiction that people just always feel entitled to like tear apart. I just made my first ceramics piece. That was really cool. Just like working on my hands. I mean, I'm really inspired by like music. I hate to say that. I feel like every filmmaker is like, I just love rap. I just feel like when I listen to Kendrick Lamar, but anyway, yeah, I'm really inspired by music, unfortunately. The new Blood Orange album is really good. The new Dijon album. Yeah. I don't know. Sometimes I just listen to music and I just like. Yeah. Like especially when I listen to say like Frank Ocean's Blonde album, I know how I sound. It's just like I want to depict like some of those feelings. I want to figure out how to do similar things to that in cinema. So yeah, I'd say music is a really big thing. Also food. Yeah, but I feel like because people don't use it as much, I feel like people are just always impressed when they see Super 8. They're just like, oh my god, wow, Super 8. So yeah, and Super 8's like relatively cheap. And getting a Super 8 camera could be like can run you anywhere from like $150 to like a little bit under $400, and then each like yeah. I mean, you guys can Google this. I don't need to say that. But yeah, so Super 8. What else would I say? I feel like handy cams are also really cool, and like mini DVs. I feel like all those analog cameras that aren't necessarily used as much in mainstream media, just like the textures and like the aesthetics of them can really add a lot to your story and can really add a lot to the footage that you're doing, because it's like people don't put that level because what the analog cameras lack in sort of like it being 4K or expensive or all those things. There's a certain level of like care and a certain level of like intention that you have to put in using them, because you have to like really know how to use them. And I think that that's something really important to embed in your work, and like that's not expensive. That's just like maybe more expensive in time, but it's not more expensive in money. So that's something you have access to. I would also say that like that's why it's important to use yourself as a starting point, because it's like we all have. Even if we don't have monetary resources, we all have sort of resources in our life, like for like whether it's like mining our own personal experience, and so much as like we feel comfortable with that, or even like involving people in our family or people that we have like special just people that like we may not realize are noteworthy, but people that like can really help us create work. I guess if that makes sense. I haven't done that before, but I will say that it has been interesting, like showing. Like just like seeing how work is received in different spaces. Like for example, with Coconut, like I showed a lot of different places, and like when I show with a Caribbean audience, it feels a bit different. And like I have a friend Kiara, and like Kiara has this really cool speculative fiction film about like vampires in Trinidad. And I remember I showed her for like a mostly like just non-Caribbean audience, and like no one laughed, like dead silent, mad serious. And then when I showed it at Third Horizon, when they showed it at Third Horizon, like the whole room was laughing, because it's a really funny film. But
you should tell them that Third Horizon is a Caribbean festival.
Yes, my bad. Yeah, Third Horizon is a Caribbean film festival in Miami. It's really great. It's one of my favorites. That and Film Diary NYC, I would die for. Love him.
Yeah. Wait, you didn't finish your story.
Oh, yeah. That was it. Yeah. No one was laughing. I was like, this is hilarious. But it's also like, I know there's a language barrier, because I'm like, maybe they don't know. I mean, I don't even hang out with people who are Trini. There were subtitles anyway. Sometimes people just don't get it. So.
I really thank you so much for showing your films in our class, and also with the manifesto that I think is very pertinent to this first year that you guys have here at NYU, because it's the year where, I mean, sure, I'm pretty sure someone has their own like A7 III or 4, or someone has, who knows, maybe someone has like an Alexa here or Red, but like in terms of what the school gives you, it's, you know, it's pretty limited for a reason, because I think we want you to start from a personal space, a personal standpoint. And I think the idea is that hopefully through Jared's films and some of the stuff we talked about, you can see that like there's no excuse to really not make great work with any resources, right? Or like whatever you have, because if, as Jared said, if you lead with yourself, that's sort of the key to it, right? That's the starting point. And let's thank Jared for visiting us.